You used to do it for free. You used to stay up late doing it. You used to lose track of time doing it. Then someone offered to pay you. And slowly, quietly, without you ever noticing it happening, you stopped loving it. This is the over-justification effect, and it has ended more creative lives than burnout, failure, or bad luck ever will. In 1973, a group of researchers at Stanford University ran one of the simplest experiments in the history of psychology. They took a group of children who already loved to draw, not children who were told to draw, not children who were rewarded for drawing, children who drew because drawing was what they did when nobody was telling them what to do. The researchers split them into 3 groups. The first group was told they would receive a certificate with a gold seal and a ribbon for drawing, a proper reward, something official, something that said your drawing was worth something. The second group also received a certificate, but they did not know it was coming. Nobody told them in advance. The reward arrived as a surprise after they finished. The third group received nothing at all, just the drawing. The experiment was simple. Let all 3 groups draw, then take the rewards away and observe what happened next. The children who had been promised nothing in advance kept drawing. The children who received an unexpected reward kept drawing. The children who had been promised a certificate before they started, the ones who now associated drawing with getting something in return, drew significantly less. They also rated the activity as less enjoyable. They drew worse. They were less engaged. They came back to it less willingly. All 3 groups were given the same paper and the same time. The only thing that changed was whether one of them had been told in advance that drawing was the kind of thing that got rewarded. That was enough to damage their relationship with it permanently. The researchers, Mark Lepper, David Greene, and Richard Nisbett, called this the over-justification effect. The name is precise. When an external reward is added to an activity that was already internally motivated, the brain receives too much justification for doing it. Before the reward, you drew because drawing felt good. After the reward, you drew to get the certificate, and once the certificate was gone, the original reason had been quietly replaced. The brain had reclassified the activity. It was no longer play, it was work that had temporarily stopped paying. And unpaid work is something most human beings are very good at avoiding. To understand why this happens at the level of the brain, you need to understand how motivation is actually built. There are 2 separate systems. Intrinsic motivation is the one you are born with. It runs on curiosity, pleasure, mastery, the feeling of getting better at something that matters to you. It does not need an audience. It does not need a scoreboard. It runs on its own internal signal. Extrinsic motivation is layered on top. It runs on rewards, recognition, money, grades, feedback, the approval of other people. It is loud and immediate and extremely easy for the brain to latch onto. Here is the problem. When both systems are running at the same time, the brain does not add them together. It replaces one with the other. Specifically, the extrinsic system overtakes the intrinsic one. Psychologists call this the undermining effect. The external reward does not boost your love of the activity, it overwrites it. And when the reward disappears, what you are left with is not the original love. You are left with a hollowed-out activity that used to mean something and now means nothing at all. Because the part of your brain that was tracking the internal signal has gone quiet. The experiment at Stanford was not a one-time result. In the decades that followed, researchers replicated it in hundreds of different forms, with children, with adults, with puzzles, painting, writing, music, sports, and mathematics. A study in 1999 by Edward Deci, Richard Ryan, and Richard Kostner combined 128 different experiments and found that tangible expected rewards consistently undermined intrinsic motivation across every domain they tested. The effect was not subtle. It was reliable, it was replicable, and it was strongest in creative tasks. The more the activity depended on internal engagement, the more damage the external reward did to it. There are nuances here that matter. Not all rewards are the same. Unexpected rewards do not seem to trigger the effect the way expected rewards do. Verbal praise does not trigger it the way money and trophies do. Feedback that gives you useful information about your performance is different from feedback that tells you only that someone approved of you. The key variable is whether the reward is controlling or informational. If the reward makes you feel evaluated and supervised, it damages the internal signal. If the reward gives you information that helps you get better, it can actually strengthen it. A bonus bonus for finishing a project you hated does nothing to the intrinsic signal you never had. But a salary for a craft you once loved has a measurable chance of slowly converting that love into something that feels a lot more like obligation. This is why the advice to turn your passion into your profession has always had a shadow under it that the motivational speakers tend not to mention. The advice is not wrong exactly, but it is incomplete in a way that has destroyed a lot of people who followed it faithfully. When you do something for free, you are in complete control of when you do it, how you do it, what you make, and what you decide the finished thing is for. The internal signal runs uninterrupted. When you do it for money, all of those variables shift. You do it on a schedule. You do it for a client who has opinions. You do it under a deadline. You do it in a direction someone else chose. The activity is the same in name. The experience of doing it is structurally different, and the brain, which is tracking not what the activity is called, but what it actually feels like, adjusts accordingly. Give it enough time and enough external pressure, and the internal signal does not just quiet down. It goes out entirely. And the cruelest part of it is that you do not notice it happening while it is happening. You notice it 6 months later when you are sitting in front of the thing you used to love and you feel absolutely nothing. When the tool that used to make you feel like yourself is just a tool now. Teresa Amabile at Harvard Business School spent years studying creativity inside organizations and found something that fits exactly here. She called it the creativity killer effect of evaluation. When people believed their work was going to be judged by an external authority, their output became measurably less creative. Not because they stopped trying, because they started optimizing for approval rather than for the work itself. They made safer choices. They self-censored more. They reached for the thing most likely to be recognized rather than the thing most true to what they actually wanted to make. The external gaze, even just the anticipation of it, narrowed the space of what felt possible. And creative narrowing, once it becomes a habit, is very hard to undo. The writers who stopped writing after their first book sold. The athletes who burned out the year after they turned professional. The cooks who could not eat their own food anymore after the restaurant opened. The teachers who chose the profession because they loved learning and 10 years later felt nothing. The musicians who released the album they were most proud of and could not pick up an instrument for a year afterward. These are not stories about people who were not cut out for their passion. They are stories about people who ran straight into the over-justification effect and did not have a name for what was happening to them. There is something important that the original Stanford experiment points toward that almost never gets discussed. The children who received the unexpected reward kept drawing. The ones who received no reward kept drawing. Only the ones who were promised something in advance before they started lost their motivation, which means the damage does not come from the reward itself. It comes from the expectation structure that gets built around the activity. The moment the brain starts treating an activity as a means to an end, as something you do in order to get something else, the relationship to that activity changes at a fundamental level. And the relationship, once changed, does not easily change back. There are people who thread this needle, who do the thing they love professionally and still love it 20 years later. What they tend to have in common is not luck or talent. It is that they have found ways to maintain the internal signal even inside a professional structure. They keep a part of the practice that no one else ever sees. They separate the work they make for the market from the work they make for themselves. They protect specific hours where the external reward structure simply does not exist. They stay in regular contact with the reason they started, not as nostalgia, but as practice. They treat the internal signal not as something that will survive on its own, but as something that has to be deliberately kept alive. Because the internal signal does not disappear all at once. It fades, slowly, over time, in a direction you are not watching because you are busy watching whether the work is selling, whether the audience is growing, whether the numbers are going up. The draw you stopped making is still somewhere in there. The song you stopped writing is still in there. The thing you used to do at midnight because you could not stop yourself is still in there. But the brain has been trained very carefully and very consistently to wait for the external signal before it starts. And the external signal, unlike the internal one, requires someone else to send it. That is the trap. You handed the ignition key to someone else and forgot you were the one who knew how to drive. The overjustification effect does not take your passion. It just teaches you to wait for permission to feel it. And permission, from the outside, almost never comes.